My name is Maren Cole. I'm 32 years old. Last spring, while doctors were cutting me open to save my baby's life, my mother turned to the head nurse and asked,
"How long will this take? We have dinner reservations at 7.
She wasn't joking. But what my parents didn't know was that the nurse standing behind them had already seen enough. And the phone call she made that evening would set something in motion that my parents never saw coming. Today, my daughter is almost 1. She has never been to my parents' house, and if I have anything to say about it, she never will. Before I go on, if you're listening right now, wherever you are in the world, drop a comment with your city and what time it is there. And if this story speaks to you, consider subscribing. No pressure, just glad you're here. Now to understand how my own mother cared more about a restaurant than her grandchild's first breath, I need to take you back 26 years. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio in a beige split-level house on Ridgemont Drive that looked exactly like every other house on the block. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard with a rusty swing set my father never got around to fixing. From the outside, we looked like any ordinary American family. 2 parents, 3 kids, a minivan in the driveway. But inside that house there was a hierarchy, and I learned where I stood before I even had the words for it. My older sister Sloane was the crown jewel, 3 years ahead of me. Blonde hair, straight A student captain of the debate team by the time she was a sophomore. My mother Judith treated Sloane like a mirror of everything she wished she had been. They shared clothes, inside jokes, weekend shopping trips to the mall. Judith would introduce Sloane to strangers as,
"My brilliant daughter."
and then pause as if the sentence was already complete. Then there was Colton, 2 years younger than me, the only boy. My father Gene had wanted a son the way some men want a second chance at their own childhood. Colton played baseball, then football, then basketball, depending on the season. Gene coached every team, attended every game, built a trophy shelf in the living room that stretched across an entire wall. When Colton walked into a room, Gene's face changed. It softened, like the sun had come out. And then there was me, Maren, the middle child, the quiet one, the one who sat at the dinner table and could go an entire meal without being spoken to. I wasn't loud enough to be a problem and wasn't exceptional enough to be a prize. I existed in the space between my sister's shine and my brother's spotlight, and after a while I think my parents simply forgot I was there. I want to be careful here. I'm not saying they were cruel to me, not in the beginning. They didn't hit me, they didn't scream at me. What they did was something quieter, and in many ways worse. They simply looked through me, like I was a window they had stopped noticing. I remember being 6 years old, spending an entire Saturday afternoon making a Mother's Day card. I used every crayon in the box. I drew our family standing in front of the house, and I put myself right in the middle, holding my mother's hand. I gave it to Judith on Sunday morning, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my ears.
"Oh, that's nice, honey."
Then she set it on the refrigerator with a magnet and went back to helping Sloane pick out an outfit for her school play. The next morning, I found my card in the kitchen trash can, buried under coffee grounds and eggshells. She hadn't even waited a full day. I fished it out. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the kitchen holding this crumpled, coffee-stained piece of construction paper, and something inside me quietly rearranged itself. I folded the card, neatly, brought it to my room, and put it in a shoebox under my bed. I kept that box for years. It became the place where I stored all the things no one wanted. By the time I was 10, I had stopped expecting anything. But that year, something happened that made the invisibility feel heavier than usual. Our elementary school held an annual art show. Students could submit one piece, and a panel of teachers chose winners from each grade. I submitted a watercolor painting of the oak tree in our backyard, the one I used to sit under when the house felt too small. I spent 3 weeks on it. I mixed my own shades of green. I painted the bark so carefully you could almost feel the texture. I won 3rd place. They gave me a ribbon and hung my painting in the school hallway. My teacher called my parents to tell them. She suggested they come see it during the open house that Friday evening. Friday came, I got dressed, I waited by the front door.
"Colton's got a scrimmage in Centerville. We'll be back late."
At 5:30, Gene grabbed his keys and said that. I looked at my mother. "Mom, the art show is tonight." Mrs. Callahan said,
"Moore and your father already committed to Colton's game. We can't be in 2 places at once."
"But you could come, just you."
"I'll try to stop by after."
Judith sighed the way people sigh when they're already done with the conversation. She didn't stop by. I stood next to my painting for 2 hours watching other kids point at their work while their parents took photos and hugged them. My teacher stayed with me for most of it. At one point, she put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Your parents must be very proud of you, Maren." I just nodded, because what was I supposed to say? That night, Jean came home talking about Colton's touchdown. Judith heated up leftover casserole. Nobody asked about the art show. Nobody asked about the ribbon. It sat in my coat pocket for 3 days before I put it in the shoebox under my bed, right next to the crumpled Mother's Day card. That was the year I started drawing in a small sketchbook I kept hidden in my backpack. I drew everything: trees, faces, the view from the school bus window, the crack in our hallway ceiling that looked like a river. I drew because it was the one thing that was fully mine. No one could forget it because no one knew about it. Looking back, I think that was the year I made a silent decision. I would stop trying to be seen by the people who lived in the same house as me. I would build something small and private and mine, and I would protect it the way no one had ever protected me. But here's the thing about being invisible in your own family. You learn to survive it, you adapt, you shrink. And then one day they do something so public, so deliberate, that shrinking is no longer enough. That day came on Thanksgiving, the year I turned 13. And what my father said in front of everyone changed the way I understood my place in that family forever. Every family has a Thanksgiving rhythm. Ours was always at my grandparents' house, my mother's parents, a small colonial in Kettering, about 20 minutes south of Dayton. My grandfather Harold was a quiet man who spent most holidays in his recliner watching football. But my grandmother Nettie was the heartbeat of that house. She cooked for 2 days straight. She set the table with real china, and she had this way of making every person who walked through her door feel like they were the most important guest. Nettie was the only person in my family who ever looked at me, truly looked at me, and saw someone worth paying attention to. She was a retired art teacher. She had noticed my sketchbook once when I was 11 during a summer visit. I had left it on the porch by accident, and when I came back for it, she was sitting in the rocking chair, turning the pages slowly. I froze. No one was supposed to see those drawings.
You see things other people walk right past, Marin. That's not common. Don't let anyone convince you it's not valuable.
But Nettie didn't criticize. She didn't say, "That's nice," the way my mother did, the way people say things they don't mean. Instead, she looked up at me and said that. I carried those words with me for years. They were the only evidence I had that maybe I wasn't as invisible as I felt. But on this particular Thanksgiving, the year I turned 13, something shifted. The invisibility became something spoken. We were all seated around Nettie's dining table. 14 people, aunts, uncles, cousins, my parents, my siblings, my grandparents. The food was laid out. Harold had said, "Grace." And then, as he did every year, Gene stood up with his glass of wine and gave what he called his gratitude toast.
This year, I want to recognize my oldest daughter who just made the honor roll for the 6th semester in a row. Sloan, you're going to be an incredible doctor someday. We couldn't be prouder.
He started with Sloan. Everyone clapped. Sloan smiled, that polished smile she'd perfected.
And my boy Colton, who scored the winning goal last month and got scouted by 2 club coaches. Son, the sky's the limit for you.
More clapping. Gene put his hand on Colton's shoulder and squeezed. Then the pause. I felt it before it happened. That half second where the air shifted, and I knew the way I always knew that whatever came next would not carry the same warmth.
And Marin, well, Marin will figure out her path eventually. She's still finding herself.
Gene looked down the table, found me, and gave a small shrug as he said it. He said it with a chuckle, like it was a gentle joke, and the table laughed. Not meanly, not loudly, just that polite automatic laughter people offer when they don't know what else to do. I looked down at my plate, the mashed potatoes blurred. I pressed my fingernails into my thigh under the table and focused on that small, sharp feeling because it was easier to hold than what was happening in my chest. And then I felt a hand, warm, steady, reaching across under the tablecloth. Nettie. She found my fingers and held them. She didn't say anything right away. She just held on.
You are more than they see. You remember that.
A few minutes later, when the conversation had moved on and people were passing the cranberry sauce, she leaned toward me and whispered that so close I could smell her lavender lotion. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak. After dinner, I helped Nettie wash dishes. We stood side by side at the sink, her washing, me drying, and she told me about a painting she had seen once in a museum in Chicago. A woman standing alone in a wheat field looking toward the horizon.
The artist painted it after everyone told her she'd never be anything.
Nettie said.
She painted it anyway, and now it hangs in a museum.
She handed me a wet plate.
You remind me of her.
That Thanksgiving burned a mark into me, not because of what my father said I'd been living in that silence my whole life, but because for the first time the hierarchy had been spoken out loud in front of everyone. There was no more pretending. Gene had ranked his children at the dinner table, and I had come in last. 2 years later, when I was 15, the gap widened in a way that involved money, and money, I learned, is how families tell the truth about who they value. I had been building an art portfolio. My art teacher had told me about a summer scholarship program at the Columbus College of Art and Design. To apply, I needed a portfolio of 12 pieces printed on quality paper, professionally bound. The materials would cost about $300. I asked my mother. I had rehearsed the conversation in my head for 2 days. Mom, there's a summer art program I want to apply to. I need about $300 for the portfolio materials.
$300 for art supplies. Marin, art doesn't pay bills. You need to be realistic.
Judith didn't look up from her laptop when she said it. The same month, my parents paid $2,700 for Colton's summer football camp in Pennsylvania. I know the amount because the brochure was on the kitchen counter for a week, and I read every line. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I went to Nettie.
Don't tell your mother. She doesn't understand what you carry. But I do.
She didn't ask me to explain. She reached into her purse, pulled out $300 in 20s, and pressed the bills into my hand. Then she looked me in the eye and said that. I made that portfolio, I applied to the program, and I got in. But I never told my parents, because by then I had learned that sharing good news with them was just offering them another chance to look away. What I didn't know was that Nettie, the one person who truly saw me, was about to be taken from me, and my parents would find a way to make even her death about everyone but me. The summer I turned 17, Nettie started coughing. Not the kind of cough you wave off with tea and honey. A deep, rattling cough that seemed to come from somewhere beneath her ribs, somewhere no medicine could reach. She tried to hide it at first. She'd turn away during family dinners, press a napkin to her mouth, and smile when she turned back like nothing had happened. But I noticed. I always noticed Nettie the way she had always noticed me. By August, she couldn't hide it anymore. Harold drove her to the hospital on a Tuesday. By Thursday, they had a diagnosis: stage 3 lung cancer. The doctor said it had been growing quietly for a long time, maybe over a year. He said they could try treatment, but he used the word manage instead of cure. And even at 17, I understood what that meant. The news hit our family like a slow earthquake. Judith cried for an entire weekend. Jean sat in the garage for hours saying nothing. Sloan, who was already in her first year of pre-med at Ohio State, called every night to discuss treatment options, with a clinical precision that made it sound like she was studying for an exam rather than losing her grandmother. And me, I just wanted to be in the room with her. I wanted to sit beside her bed and hold her hand and tell her about the portfolio, about the summer program, about the watercolor I was working on, that used the same shade of green as her kitchen curtains. I wanted to give her all the words I had been saving, for the one person who actually wanted to hear them. But my parents had other plans.
Sloan is already there. She drove down from Columbus this morning. There's no need for all of us to crowd the room.
The first time I asked to visit Nettie in the hospital, Judith said that. I won't crowd the room, I just want to sit with her.
Marin, your grandmother's very tired. Too many visitors will overwhelm her. Besides, I need you to clean the kitchen before Dad gets home.
I stood in the hallway holding my backpack and watched my mother pick up her car keys and drive to the hospital without me. She didn't invite me. She didn't say, maybe tomorrow. She simply walked past me like I was a coat rack.
Your mother said no, Marin. Don't make this harder than it already is.
The second time I asked, 3 days later, Jean stepped in and said that. How is me visiting my own grandmother making things harder?
Because Sloan is handling it. She knows what to talk to the doctors about. You'd just be sitting there.
Just sitting there, as if sitting with someone you love simply being present was worthless. As if love only counted when it came with a pre-med vocabulary. I stopped asking. Instead, I did something I had never done before. I disobeyed. On a Saturday morning while Judith was at the grocery store and Jean was at Colton's game, I walked to the bus stop on Ridgemont Drive, took the number 14 bus downtown, transferred to the number 6, and rode 40 minutes to Kettering Medical Center. I brought my sketchbook. I brought a small tin of butter cookies Nettie liked. And I brought every ounce of courage a 17-year-old girl has when she knows she's running out of time. When I walked into her room, Nettie was lying on her side facing the window. The television was off. The room smelled like antiseptic and something else. Something faintly sweet like the lavender lotion she always wore. Her hair was thinner than the last time I'd seen her. The skin on her hands looked like paper. But when she heard my footsteps, she turned. And when she saw me, her face did something that I will carry with me until the day I die. It opened. Not a smile exactly. Something deeper. Something that said you came.
Marin.
Her voice was a whisper wrapped in gravel.
Pull up that chair. Come closer.
I sat beside her for 4 hours. I showed her my latest sketches. I told her about the summer program, about the instructor who said I had an unusual eye. I read to her from a book of Mary Oliver poems I'd found at a yard sale. And when I ran out of things to say, I just held her hand and we listened to the rain that had started tapping against the window. At one point, she squeezed my fingers, not hard because she didn't have the strength for hard anymore, and said something that became the most important sentence anyone has ever spoken to me.
You have the quietest strength I've ever seen, Marin. Don't let them take that from you. Promise me.
I promise, Grandma. She closed her eyes. I stayed until the nurses changed shifts. Then I took the bus home, washed the dishes Judith had left in the sink, and went to bed without saying a word. Nettie died 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in September. Harold called our house at 7:15. I was eating cereal in the kitchen. I heard Judith's voice break in the hallway. I put down my spoon and stared at the milk, turning the cereal soft, and I thought about lavender and butter cookies and rain on a hospital window. The funeral was held at St. Luke's in Kettering. It was a warm day, too warm for September, and the church was filled with people I half recognized, neighbors, fellow teachers, women from Nettie's book club. Judith gave the eulogy. She talked about Nettie's strength, her cooking, her devotion to family. She mentioned Sloane.
Mom always said Sloane had her eyes.
She mentioned Colton.
Mom was at every one of Colton's games she could make.
She mentioned Harold, of course. She did not mention me, not once, not a single syllable. I sat in the third pew between an aunt I barely knew and a cousin who was playing a game on his phone, and I listened to my mother erase me from my grandmother's story. The one person who had seen me, the one person who had held my hand under the table and whispered that I was enough, and even in her death, my parents found a way to keep me outside. After the service, as people gathered in the church basement for sandwiches and coffee, a woman in a gray suit approached me. She said she was from Nettie's attorney's office. She handed me a small envelope and said that my grandmother had left specific instructions for it to go directly to me. Inside was a small brass key and a note that read, "Safe deposit box, First Dayton Bank, for Marin only." I closed the envelope and slipped it into my coat pocket. I didn't open the box for almost a year. Part of me wasn't ready. Part of me wanted to keep one last piece of Nettie sealed and waiting like a letter you save for a day when you really need it. But when I finally did open that box, what I found inside changed the entire direction of my life. And when my mother found out about it, her reaction confirmed everything I had always suspected about where I stood in her heart. I opened Nettie's safe deposit box on a rainy afternoon in June, 2 weeks before I left for college. I drove to First Dayton Bank, alone, signed the paperwork with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, and followed a clerk down a narrow hallway to a room with fluorescent lights and no windows. The box was small. Inside there were 2 things. The first was an envelope containing a cashier's check for $12,000. $12,000. To a 17-year-old girl who had been buying art supplies with laundromat wages, it felt like a fortune. A note clipped to the check read in Nettie's careful handwriting.
For your education, for your art, for the life you're going to build. Don't let anyone tell you what this is for. It's yours.
The second item was a letter, 2 pages front and back, written in the same steady hand. I won't share every word. Some of it is too private, too sacred, too much between a grandmother and the granddaughter she chose to see. But I'll tell you the parts that mattered most. She wrote that I was the grandchild who reminded her most of herself, that she had grown up invisible in her own family too, that she had married Harold knowing he was quiet but kind, and that quiet kindness had saved her life. She wrote that she watched the way Judith treated me, and it broke her heart because she recognized the pattern Judith had learned it from somewhere, and Nettie blamed herself for not stopping it sooner.
Build a family that sees you, Marin. That's all that matters.
And then near the end she wrote that line, the line I would eventually frame and hang on my studio wall. I sat in that fluorescent room and cried until the clerk knocked gently and asked if I was all right. I never told my parents about the check or the letter. I deposited the money into a savings account I had opened on my own at a different bank, and I hid the letter in the shoebox under my bed, the same shoebox that held my crumpled Mother's Day card and my third-place art ribbon and every other small proof that I had once existed in that house. 2 months later, I left for Columbus. I had earned a partial scholarship to the Columbus College of Art and Design, the same school whose summer program Nettie had helped me attend. The scholarship covered about 60% of tuition. Nettie's money, combined with my savings from 3 years of working at the laundromat and a part-time campus job, would cover the rest. I had done the math on a napkin at the kitchen table one night while my parents watched Sloane's graduation video for the 3rd time. The day I moved to college, I loaded my things into a used Honda Civic I had bought for $2,300 with my own money. It had a dent in the passenger door and the air conditioning worked only when it felt like it, but it was mine. Everything I owned fit in the trunk and the back seat. 2 suitcases, a box of art supplies, the shoebox, and a plant Nettie had given me that I had somehow kept alive for 2 years.
You'll be fine, Marin. You're so independent.
My parents didn't help me move. Jean had taken Colton to a preseason football showcase in Cincinnati. Judah said she had a migraine and said that. She said it like it was a compliment, like I had chosen this. Like independence was a personality trait and not a survival skill I had built, because no one had ever offered to carry anything for me. I drove to Columbus alone. I carried my boxes up 3 flights of stairs alone. I made my bed in a dorm room the size of a closet, sat on the mattress, and looked out the window at a parking lot full of parents hugging their children goodbye. I watched a father carry a mini fridge on his shoulder while his daughter laughed. I watched a mother hang curtains in her son's window. I watched families do what families are supposed to do. Then I closed the curtain and unpacked my things. College changed me. Not overnight and not dramatically, but slowly, the way sunlight changes the color of wood over years. I discovered that I was good at things I had never been given the chance to try. I studied graphic design. I took illustration classes, typography, branding. My professors noticed me, not because I was loud or brilliant, but because I worked harder than anyone in the room, and I never ever assumed someone else would do it for me. By my junior year, I had started freelancing. Small jobs, at first logos for local coffee shops, flyers for campus events, a website redesign for a yoga studio in the short north. The money wasn't much, but it was mine, and each project taught me something the one before hadn't. It was also in my junior year that I met Daniel. He was a 4th-year medical student at Ohio State, and we met at a coffee shop on High Street where I was working on a logo redesign, and he was studying for his boards. He asked to borrow my phone charger. I said yes. He returned it 20 minutes later with a coffee he'd bought me and a note on the napkin that said,
"Thanks. Your screensaver is a really good painting. Is it yours?"
Daniel was tall, steady, warm in a way that didn't demand anything in return. He grew up in a small town in Indiana, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still made it to every school event. He understood what it meant to build something from nothing. And he understood me, not because I explained myself, but because he paid attention.
Marin, you just apologized for eating food that I offered you. Or you do this all the time. You apologize for existing. You don't have to earn the right to be here.
One night, about 3 months into dating, we were sitting on his apartment floor eating takeout, and I apologized for taking the last egg roll. He put down his chopsticks, looked at me, and said that. I didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever named it like that before. We were married 2 years after I graduated. A small ceremony at the Franklin County Courthouse. 4 friends, my art professor who had become a mentor, Daniel's mother Ruth, who drove 6 hours from Indiana and cried through the whole thing and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack.
We'll try to make it.
I had invited my parents. Judith said that. They didn't come. They didn't call. They didn't send a card. That night alone in our small apartment, while Daniel slept, I opened Nettie's letter for the 2nd time. I read her final line again.
Build a family that sees you. That's all that matters.
And I whispered into the dark, I'm trying, Grandma. Daniel and I built our life piece by piece. He started his residency in internal medicine. I grew my design studio from a desk in our bedroom into a real client list. We weren't rich. We ate a lot of pasta. We argued about dishes and alarm clocks and whose turn it was to take out the trash. But every single day I was seen. Every single day I existed. So when I found out I was pregnant, I thought foolishly, naively, with a hope I should have buried years ago, that maybe this baby would be the thing that finally made my parents see me too. I had never been more wrong in my life. I found out I was pregnant on a Wednesday morning in March. I was 31 years old. Daniel had already left for rounds at the hospital, and I was standing in our bathroom holding a test with 2 pink lines, staring at it like it might change its mind. It didn't change its mind. I sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long time. Not because I was scared Daniel and I had been trying for almost a year, but because something was happening inside me that I didn't expect. I wasn't just happy. I was terrified. Not of being a mother. I was terrified of becoming the kind of mother I'd been given. I was terrified that the damage my parents had done to me would somehow leak into this child, like water through a crack in the ceiling you thought you'd fixed. Daniel came home that evening, and I showed him the test. He didn't say anything at first. He just pulled me into his arms and held me, and I felt his chest shake, and I realized he was crying. When he finally pulled back, he said,
"This kid is going to be so loved, Marin, so seen, I promise."
I believed him. I still believe him. The next day, I did something I had been going back and forth about for hours. I called my mother. It had been almost 4 months since we'd last spoken. That was normal for us. We didn't have a relationship so much as we had an occasional awkward exchange of words that neither of us knew what to do with. I would call on Christmas, she would call on my birthday, usually a day late. We would talk for 5 minutes about the weather, about Sloane's career, about Colton's latest hobby, and then we would hang up and go back to our separate lives. But this was different. This was a grandchild. The first grandchild. And somewhere deep in the part of me that still kept that crumpled Mother's Day card in a shoebox, I thought maybe this will change things.
Myron, is everything okay?
Judith answered on the third ring and said that. I told her. I said the words plainly. Mom, I'm pregnant.
Oh my God, Jean Marin is pregnant.
The silence lasted 2 full seconds. And then Judith screamed that. Not a bad scream, a joyful one. High-pitched, breathless, almost girlish.
What really?
I heard my father in the background say that. For about 90 seconds, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 6 years old, holding that Mother's Day card. I felt like my mother was happy because of me, because of something I had done. But that feeling didn't last. It couldn't. Because very quickly I realized that Judith's excitement had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with the baby. The calls started coming 2-3 times a week. But the questions were never about me. Never. How are you feeling, Marin? Never. Are you getting enough rest? Never. How's the nausea? It was always about the baby. What's the gender? Have you picked a name? When is the due date? Are you delivering at a good hospital? Is Daniel going to be in the room?
About
a month in, Judith revealed the real reason for her sudden interest. Her voice was casual, rehearsed.
Sloane has been having trouble with fertility. She's been seeing a specialist, but it's not looking good. And Colton, Colton, he's not even close to settling down.
She paused, let the silence breathe.
So this baby, this is the first grandchild for us. It's special, Marin, really special.
I understood. The math was simple. Sloane couldn't have children, Colton wouldn't have children. I was the only option left. My parents hadn't suddenly seen me. They had simply run out of alternatives. A few weeks later, Judith called with what she presented as a generous offer. She and Jean would fly to Columbus when the baby came. They would help. They would be there.
But
she added.
I've been thinking, for the middle name, wouldn't it be lovely to use Sloane? Sloane has always wanted to be part of something like this, and since she can't have her own...
I let the sentence hang in the air for a moment. Then I said as gently as I could, Daniel and I have already chosen the name. We're going to name her Lila. Lila Nettie Cole Harmon.
Nettie, you're using my mother's name but not your sister's.
The silence on the other end was long, cold. I could feel my mother's jaw tighten through the phone. Grandma Nettie meant a lot to me, Mom.
She meant a lot to all of us.
After that, Judith went quiet. 3 weeks passed without a single call. No texts, nothing. I had committed the unforgivable sin of naming my own child without my sister's approval.
Marin, don't make this difficult. Your mother is trying. She's excited about this baby. Just let her be involved. She's your mother.
It was Jean who finally broke the silence. He called on a Sunday, his voice carrying the tired, weary patience of a man who had spent 35 years managing his wife's emotions. She's been involved for 3 weeks, Dad, after 13 years of silence.
That's not fair.
Isn't it? He didn't answer. Around my 7th month, the pregnancy took a turn. My blood pressure, which had been borderline high since the 2nd trimester, spiked dangerously. My doctor used the word pre-eclampsia. She put me on modified bed rest. She said if it got worse, they would have to deliver early. Daniel came home from the hospital every night and checked my blood pressure himself, his doctor hands trembling slightly in a way they never did with his own patients. I called Judith to tell her. I don't know why. Maybe I still needed my mother. Maybe the little girl who fished her card out of the trash can was still in there somewhere hoping. Mom, I'm having complications. My blood pressure's really high. The doctor says it could be preeclampsia. They might have to do an emergency delivery.
Sloane says preeclampsia is manageable. She deals with it all the time. You're probably overthinking it, Marin. Don't be dramatic.
Don't be dramatic. My sister, who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, was now the medical authority on my pregnancy. And my mother was using her opinion to minimize my fear. I hung up the phone and sat on the couch with my hand on my belly, feeling Lila move inside me. And I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not an angry one, a quiet one. The kind of decision you make when you've been practicing it your entire life. I would get through this. I would deliver this baby. And I would protect her from the people who had spent 31 years teaching me what it felt like to not be protected. But 3 weeks before my due date, my body made the decision for me. My blood pressure spiked so high in the middle of the night that Daniel drove me to the hospital with one hand on the wheel and the other holding mine. And what happened in that delivery room, what my mother said to the nurse while doctors were cutting me open, would become the moment I finally stopped waiting. It was 2:17 in the morning when Daniel shook me awake. I don't remember what I was dreaming about, but I remember the way his voice sounded calm on the surface, tight underneath, the way a doctor talks when he's trying not to scare the patient.
Marn, wake up. We need to go. Now.
My head was pounding, not a normal headache, a deep pressurized throbbing behind my eyes like something was swelling inside my skull. My vision was blurry at the edges, my hands were shaking, and when I tried to sit up, the room tilted sideways. Daniel already had my hospital bag in one hand and his car keys in the other. He helped me into the passenger seat, buckled me in, and drove to Riverside Methodist Hospital, in a silence that was louder than any conversation we'd ever had. He ran 2 red lights. I didn't tell him to slow down. I knew. At the emergency entrance, things moved fast. A nurse met us with a wheelchair. They took my blood pressure. It was dangerously high numbers that made the triage nurse call for the attending physician immediately. Within 15 minutes, I was in a hospital gown, hooked to monitors, and surrounded by people who were speaking in short, professional sentences that I understood just enough to be afraid. Fetal heart rate is dropping. BP not responding to the mag. Page Dr. Kessler. We may need to go now. Dr. Kessler was my obstetrician. She arrived within 20 minutes, still pulling on her surgical cap, and after one look at the monitors, she turned to me and spoke with a gentleness that didn't match the urgency in her eyes. Marin, your blood pressure is not stabilizing, and the baby is showing signs of distress. We need to deliver by emergency C-section. We're going to move quickly. Okay, Daniel can be in the room with you. I nodded. I couldn't speak. My hand found Daniel's, and I held on so tightly I could feel his knuckles shift under my grip. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against mine.
I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere.
Before they wheeled me out, Daniel had made one phone call. To my parents. It was my request, and even now, lying on a gurney, terrified. I'm not entirely sure why I asked him to call. Maybe because some part of me still believed that if I were in real danger, truly, life or death danger, they would show up as parents. Not as Sloane's parents, not as Colton's parents. As mine. Jean and Judith caught a flight out of Dayton that morning. They landed in Columbus around noon. By that point, I was already prepped in the operating room, anteroom, already counting the ceiling tiles and trying to slow my breathing, while nurses adjusted the epidural line in my spine. Daniel told me later what happened in the hallway. I didn't witness it myself, but he recounted it with the kind of precise, quiet anger that Daniel reserves for things that truly break his heart. My parents arrived at the maternity ward at approximately 12:40 in the afternoon. A nurse directed them to the waiting area. Judith was carrying her purse and a small gift bag, pink tissue paper sticking out the top. Jean was on his phone. They didn't ask to see me. They didn't ask the nurse how I was doing. They sat down. 10 minutes later, the charge nurse came out to update them. Her name was Donna Whitfield, 55 years old, 27 years of labor and delivery experience. Donna was the kind of woman who had seen everything a hospital could show a person, the miracles and the losses, the best of people and the worst, and had developed a radar for both. Daniel told me later that Donna had a small cross necklace and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and that she looked like someone's favorite aunt. The kind of person who would bring you soup when you were sick and also tell you the truth when no one else would. Donna approached my parents and introduced herself. She explained that I was being prepared for an emergency C-section, that the baby was in distress, and that the surgical team was moving as quickly as they could. Judith listened, then she looked at her watch. Not quickly, not subtly. She looked at her watch the way someone looks at a clock when they're calculating how long until the next thing on their schedule.
How long will this take? We flew in this morning and we haven't eaten. There's a nice Italian place Jean found near the hotel. We were hoping to make an early dinner.
We're kind of exhausted. It was a 5:30 flight.
Daniel told me that Donna didn't move. She stood perfectly still for about 3 seconds, which in a hospital hallway is a very long time. Her face didn't change. Her voice didn't rise. But something shifted behind her eyes. Something ancient and professional and deeply, deeply angry. She said slowly, clearly the way you speak, when you want every word to land exactly where you aim it. Your daughter is about to have her abdomen cut open, so your grandchild has a chance to live. There is no estimated wait time for survival. I suggest you sit down. Judith opened her mouth. Donna didn't wait. She turned and walked through the double doors into the surgical wing without looking back. Inside the operating room, I knew none of this. I was lying on the table, arms extended, a blue curtain blocking my view of my own body. Daniel sat beside my head, holding my hand, talking to me in a low, steady murmur that I couldn't fully hear but that kept me anchored. The anesthesiologist checked my vitals every 30 seconds. Dr. Kessler was behind the curtain, and I could feel pressure. No pain, just pressure as she worked. And then Donna came in. She had been in the hallway with my parents 30 seconds ago, but now she was beside me, her gloved hand finding mine on the side Daniel wasn't holding. She leaned close to my ear and said in a voice so warm it made my throat tighten, "You're doing great, Mama. Your baby is almost here. I'm going to stay right beside you." Mama. She called me Mama, a stranger, a nurse, a woman I had known for less than an hour, and she said it with more tenderness than my own mother had shown me in 31 years. At 12:58 in the afternoon, Lila Nettie Cole Harmon came into the world, 5 pounds 11 ounces, a thin, reedy cry that filled the operating room like a bell. The doctor held her up briefly, and I caught a glimpse of her tiny pink, furious alive before they took her to the warming table. I was sobbing. Daniel was sobbing. Donna squeezed my hand and said, "She's beautiful. She's perfect. You did it." In that moment, in that sterile room with its bright lights and beeping monitors, I understood something with absolute clarity. The family I had been born into had never held me the way this stranger just did. And the family I was building, Daniel, Lila, even Donna, would never let me disappear. But the story wasn't over. Because what Donna did after the surgery, what she documented, what she reported, and what she later said to me in the recovery room would set into motion something my parents never anticipated. And what my mother did 3 days later while I could barely walk proved that some people don't change. They just find new ways to take from you. I spent the first night after surgery drifting in and out of a fog. The pain medication made everything soft and distant, like watching my own life through frosted glass. Daniel slept in the chair beside my bed, his hand resting on the edge of the bassinet where Lila lay wrapped in a hospital blanket with tiny blue and pink stripes. Every time she made a sound, a whimper, a sigh, the smallest movement of her fingers, he was awake, instantly leaning over her, checking. I watched him through half-closed eyes and thought this is what it looks like when someone shows up. The next morning, Donna came to check on me during her shift. She was quiet and professional, checking my incision, adjusting the IV, asking about my pain level on a scale of 1 to 10. But before she left, she pulled a chair up beside my bed and sat down. "Marin, I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly." I nodded. "Yesterday, before your surgery, I had a conversation with your parents in the hallway. I've been doing this for 27 years, and I've seen families in crisis behave in all kinds of ways. Fear makes people say strange things. I understand that." She paused. "But what I observed from your parents was not fear. It was inconvenience. They were inconvenienced by your emergency. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to." She was naming something I had felt my entire life, but had never heard spoken out loud by someone outside the situation. "I've documented the interaction in your file," she continued. "I've also flagged it with our social work team. That's standard protocol when we observe behavior that suggests a pattern of emotional neglect affecting a patient's well-being, especially a new mother. I'm not doing this to cause trouble. I'm doing it because it's my job to protect you and your baby, and because I've seen what happens when this kind of thing goes unaddressed." She looked at me with steady, serious eyes. "You don't owe them access to this child, Marin. I want you to remember that." I thanked her. I couldn't say much more because my throat had closed. She squeezed my shoulder, stood up, and went back to her rounds. That afternoon, Daniel went home to shower and pick up a few things I needed. He would be gone about 2 hours. My parents, who had been staying at a hotel near the hospital, came to visit. When they walked in, Judith was carrying flowers, pink roses. She set them on the windowsill and looked at Lila in the bassinet with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in years. Softness, hunger. Not the kind of hunger that comes from love, the kind that comes from wanting something that belongs to someone else.
"Oh, Jean, look at her. She looks just like Sloane did as a baby."
Not like me, like Sloane. I let it go. I was too tired and too medicated to fight that particular battle. I closed my eyes and let myself rest while my parents sat in the room talking quietly to each other about the baby as if I were furniture. I woke up about an hour later to a sound I didn't expect. Laughter, not from my parents, from my sister. Sloane was standing by the bassinet holding Lila. My sister, who had not spoken to me in 3 years, who had not called when I was hospitalized, who had not sent a single text during my pregnancy, was standing in my recovery room cradling my newborn daughter while my mother took photographs with her phone.
"Mom, get one from this angle. The natural lighting is better."
I pushed myself up on my elbows. Pain shot through my abdomen, sharp and white. When did you get here?"
"Sloane flew in this morning. I called her last night. She wanted to meet the baby."
Judith didn't look up from her phone when she said that. "You called her, you invited her, to my hospital room while I was asleep."
Maren, she's the baby's aunt. Of course she's going to visit.
I looked at Sloane. She was smiling down at Lila with a warmth that might have been genuine or might have been performance. With Sloane, I could never tell. She glanced at me and said,
She's gorgeous, Maren. Congratulations.
It was the first word she had spoken to me in 3 years, and it came while she was holding my child without my permission. That evening after Sloane and my parents had left for dinner, the Italian place, I assumed Daniel came back. I told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening in that way it did when he was containing something large. There's more, I said. I told him what I had discovered on my phone while they were in the room. Judith had posted 4 photographs of Lila on her social media. The caption read,
My first grandchild. So blessed to be here for this miracle. Nasa so kaidia ay sikanso.
She tagged Sloane. She tagged Jean. She did not tag me. She did not mention me. In the photos, you couldn't even see me. I was cropped out, literally and figuratively, from the arrival of my own daughter. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed and was quiet for a long time. Then he said,
What do you need me to do?
Nothing yet, but there's something else. That afternoon while I was resting, I had received a notification from Lila's pediatrician's office, a message confirming a call they had received from the baby's grandmother requesting information about the newborn vaccination schedule and asking to be listed as an emergency contact. Judith had called my daughter's doctor. She had identified herself as the grandmother in charge. She had attempted to access Lila's medical information and insert herself into the records without asking me, without telling me, without any discussion at all. I called my mother the next morning. I kept my voice even, controlled, the same quiet voice I had been perfecting for 26 years. Hey, Mom, I need you to ask me before making decisions about my daughter. You called her pediatrician without telling me. You posted photos of her online without my consent. You invited Sloane into my hospital room while I was sleeping.
I'm her grandmother. I have rights, Maren.
Judith's voice went cold, immediate, like a door slamming shut. You have the rights I give you. She's my child.
Don't you dare speak to me that way after everything we've done flying out here, sitting in that horrible waiting room, spending money on flights and hotels. And this is the thanks we get.
Don't start this again, Maren. Your mother is just trying to help.
I heard Jean's voice in the background, tired and flat, say that. I hung up. I didn't slam the phone. I didn't cry. I simply pressed the red button and set the phone face down on the bedside table. That night after Lila was fed and asleep and the room was dark, I called Daniel. He was on a night shift, but he answered on the first ring. I said 5 words. I'm done. She'll never know.
Okay, we'll do this together.
He didn't ask me to explain. He didn't ask what done meant or who she was. He just said that. What I meant was Lila would never grow up the way I did. She would never sit at a Thanksgiving table and hear herself ranked last. She would never fish a handmade card out of the garbage. She would never stand next to a painting in an empty hallway waiting for someone who wasn't coming. But setting that boundary would cost me more than I expected. Because the next morning, when I asked my parents to leave, they didn't just leave. They lawyered up. And the letter that arrived 2 weeks later forced me to fight for the one thing I had never been given the right to protect my own child. The morning I asked my parents to leave was a Sunday. Lila was 4 days old. I was standing in the kitchen of our apartment, still moving slowly, still holding my abdomen when I turned too quickly, still feeling the pull of stitches every time I reached for something above my waist. Daniel had made coffee and gone to the pharmacy to pick up my medication. My parents were sitting on the couch in the living room, Judith scrolling through her phone, Jean watching a football pregame with the volume low. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room and said it plainly. No preamble, no build-up. Mom, Dad, I need you to go home.
Excuse me.
Judith looked up, not alarmed, annoyed, the way she used to look when I interrupted her while she was talking to Sloane. I appreciate you coming, but I need space. Daniel and I need to figure this out on our own as a family. I'm asking you to leave.
Maren, we flew out here to help. We've been here less than a week.
Jean muted the television. He looked at Judith, then back at me and said that. I know, and I'm grateful for the intention. But the way things have gone, the photos, the phone call to Lila's Dr. Sloane showing up without anyone asking me, I need to set some boundaries. That word, boundaries. It landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Judith's face changed. The softness vanished. What replaced it was something harder, older, something I had seen my entire life, but had never directly confronted.
Boundaries. You want to talk about boundaries? I am your mother. That baby is my grandchild. I have a right to be part of her life.
You have the relationship I choose to give you. That's how this works.
How this works, Jean, are you hearing this? After everything we've done for her, after we dropped everything and flew out here, she's kicking us out.
After everything we've done for you, Marin, that's what your mother is saying. You think this is easy for us?
Gene stood up. He was taller than me, broader, and when he was angry, he had a way of filling a room that made me feel 6 years old again. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look away. "What have you done for me, Dad? Name one thing." The room went silent. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that presses against your eardrums. Gene opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. "You didn't come to my art show. You didn't come to my graduation. You didn't come to my wedding. You didn't call when I was hospitalized. You didn't ask how I was feeling once during my entire pregnancy. The only reason you're here is because Sloan can't have children and Colton doesn't want them. I was your last option, and even now, standing in my home 4 days after major surgery, you're making this about yourselves."
You're being cruel. You've always been difficult, Marin, even as a child.
Judith's eyes were wet, but I knew those tears. I had seen them before. They weren't grief. They were fury dressed up as hurt feelings. I wasn't difficult. I was invisible. There's a difference. They left that afternoon. Judith didn't hug me goodbye. She picked up her bag, put on her coat, and walked to the rental car without turning around. Jean paused at the door, looked at me for a long moment and said,
You'll regret this.
I said nothing. I closed the door. I locked it. And then I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and held my knees to my chest carefully because of the stitches, and I shook. Not from sadness, from the adrenaline of doing something I had spent 26 years being too afraid to do. 2 weeks later, the letter arrived. It was from a law firm in Dayton, certified mail. The envelope was thick and cream-colored and had the kind of embossed letterhead that's designed to make you feel small before you even read the first word. Judith had filed a petition for grandparent visitation rights. Under Ohio law, grandparents can petition the court for visitation if they believe it is in the best interest of the child. The petition alleged that I was emotionally unstable, nerdarzed, that I had severed a loving family relationship without cause, and that Lila was being denied a meaningful bond with her maternal grandparents. I read it twice. Then I set it on the kitchen table, poured a glass of water, and called Daniel. They're suing us.
For what?
For Lila. Daniel came home within the hour. We sat together and read the petition line by line. When we finished, he looked at me and said,
We fight this together and we win.
We hired Teresa Maddox, a family law attorney in Columbus who specialized in custody and visitation disputes. Teresa was in her late 40s, sharp, direct, the kind of woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and still managed to look like she could cross-examine you into dust. During our first meeting, she asked me one question that I will never forget. Marin, do your parents have a history of being involved in your life? I almost laughed. Instead, I told her everything. Every birthday missed, every achievement ignored, every time I was ranked, last overlooked, erased. I told her about the art show, the Thanksgiving toast, the Mother's Day card in the trash, the funeral eulogy that didn't mention my name, the wedding they didn't attend, the pregnancy they dismissed. Teresa took notes for 2 hours. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, This is one of the most well-documented cases of selective parental neglect I've ever seen. And you've been documenting it your whole life without even realizing it. She was right. I had. The shoebox under my bed, the one I had carried from Dayton to my dorm to every apartment I'd ever lived in, was full of evidence. Not dramatic evidence, not bruises or police reports. Just small, quiet proof of a lifetime of being unseen. Report cards no one signed. Recital programs with no one in the audience. A graduation announcement returned to sender. And Donna's hospital notes, which Teresa called the most damning piece of professional testimony a nurse has ever written in a maternity ward. We filed our response. We prepared our case. And 3 months later, we walked into a courtroom in Franklin County where a judge would decide whether my parents, who had spent 31 years ignoring me, deserved the right to be part of my daughter's life. What happened in that courtroom broke my mother in a way I never intended. But it also proved once and for all that silence has a memory, and it keeps receipts. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No grand wooden benches, no gallery full of spectators. Just a modest room in the Franklin County Family Court with fluorescent lighting, a judge's bench, 2 tables, and an American flag in the corner that leaned slightly to the left. It smelled like old carpet and printer ink. Judith and Jean sat at the table on the right with their attorney, a man in a navy suit who kept adjusting his tie. Judith was wearing the pearl earrings she always wore to church. Her posture was perfect. Her hands were folded. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed this moment, the grieving grandmother denied access to her only grandchild by an ungrateful daughter. I sat on the left with Teresa and Daniel. Lila was not in the room. She was home with Ruth Daniels' mother, who had driven 6 hours from Indiana the night before without being asked. Because that's what Ruth did. She showed up. The judge was a woman named Honorable Catherine Pryor. Mid-60s, gray hair cut short. Reading glasses. She had the kind of face that gave away nothing, no warmth, no hostility, just steady, patient attention. She read through both filings in silence for several minutes before looking up. Mrs. Cole, you've petitioned this court for grandparent visitation rights. I've reviewed your filing. Before we proceed, I'd like to ask you a few questions directly. Can you describe your relationship with your daughter prior to the birth of this child?
We've always been close. We're a normal family. Like any family, we've had our ups and downs, but I love all 3 of my children equally.
Judith straightened and said that. She had prepared for this. Did you attend your daughter's wedding?
No, there was a scheduling conflict.
Did you attend her college graduation?
But I don't recall the specifics.
You don't recall whether you attended your daughter's graduation.
No, we weren't able to attend?
Judith's attorney shifted in his seat. Judith swallowed. Were you aware that your daughter was hospitalized with preeclampsia during her pregnancy?
She mentioned she was having some blood pressure issues. My older daughter Sloan is a medical professional, and she said it was likely manageable.
So your response to your daughter's pregnancy emergency was to consult your other daughter, rather than speaking directly with your daughter's physician or visiting her yourself. Judith didn't answer immediately. Her mouth opened, then closed. Jean looked at the floor. Teresa stood. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to submit into evidence a documented timeline of my client's interactions with her parents spanning 26 years. This includes school records, written correspondence, a hospital incident report filed by the charge nurse during my client's emergency delivery, and a sworn statement from the same nurse describing the petitioner's behavior during a life-threatening medical event. Judge Pryor took the folder and spent several minutes reading. The room was so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights humming above us. When she looked up, she turned to Judith. Mrs. Cole, the hospital report indicates that during your daughter's emergency C-section, you asked the attending nurse, and I'm quoting directly from the file, "How long will this take? We have dinner reservations." Is that accurate?
I was tired. We had just flown in. I didn't mean it the way it sounded.
Judith's face went white. Not pink, not flushed. White. The kind of white that happens when blood leaves your face all at once. And the report also notes that at no point during the pre-surgical period did either you or your husband ask about your daughter's medical condition. You asked only about the estimated wait time.
Your Honor, we were worried. We just didn't know how to...
Mr. Cole, I'll ask you to wait until you're addressed. Judge Pryor closed the folder. She removed her glasses and set them on the bench. And then she spoke in a tone that I recognized immediately. It was the same tone Donna had used in the hospital hallway. Calm, precise, final. This court does not award visitation to grandparents who have demonstrated a documented pattern of emotional neglect toward the parent. The petitioners have failed to establish that a meaningful, consistent relationship with the minor child existed or was actively pursued. This petition is denied. She struck the gavel once. The sound was small, but it echoed. Outside the courthouse, Judith was crying. Not quietly. She stood on the stone steps in the October sun and wept with her hand over her mouth, the pearl earrings catching the light. Jean stood beside her, rigid, his jaw set.
You'll regret this, Marin. We're your parents. You're going to need us someday.
As Daniel and I walked past them toward the parking lot, Jean reached out and caught my arm and said that. I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked at his face, and I said the truest thing I've ever spoken. I've regretted things my whole life, Dad. This isn't one of them. We drove home. Lila was asleep in Ruth's arms when we walked in. Ruth had made soup. The apartment smelled like rosemary and warm bread. I picked up my daughter, held her against my chest, and stood by the window watching the trees lose their leaves in the late afternoon light. 6 months passed. My design studio grew. I landed a contract with a children's clothing brand based in Cincinnati. They wanted original illustrations for their seasonal line. The project paid well, but more than that, it let me do the thing I had always done best, create something from nothing. I worked late at night after Lila was in bed, sketching at my desk while Daniel read medical journals, on the couch, his feet propped on the coffee table. One evening my phone buzzed, a voicemail from Jean. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me press play.
Marin, I know I don't have the right to ask anything, but I've been thinking about that Thanksgiving. When you were 13, I should have said something different. I should have said a lot of things different. I don't know if it matters now, but I'm sorry.
His voice was different. Not the commanding voice of the man who made Thanksgiving toasts and coached football and filled rooms with his presence. This voice was smaller, older, cracked. The voicemail ended. I sat in my studio for a long time staring at the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't call back. Not because I was punishing him, but because I wasn't ready. And for the first time in my life, I gave myself permission to not be ready. To let the silence be mine on my terms. Judith never reached out.
Mom misses the baby.
Sloan sent one text months later that said that. I read it. I didn't respond. But Donna, I wrote to. A handwritten letter on heavy cream paper, the kind you use when the words matter. I thanked her for standing beside me, for calling me Mama, for seeing what my own mother refused to see. She wrote back, one paragraph, in neat, slanted handwriting on hospital stationery. You didn't need saving, Marin. You just needed someone to stand beside you until you could stand on your own. You've been standing for a long time. I just made sure you knew it. I framed that letter. It hangs in my studio next to Nettie's letter, next to Lila's first footprint in plaster. On a quiet evening in April, I sat on the floor of my studio while Lila stacked wooden blocks nearby. She was almost 1. She had Daniel's brown eyes and my grandmother's stubborn chin. She knocked the tower down, looked at me, and laughed that open, weightless laugh that only children have, the kind that hasn't been taught to be careful yet. I looked at Nettie's framed letter on the wall. Build a family that sees you. That's all that matters. I picked up my pencil and started drawing. A woman standing alone in a wide open field, her face turned toward the light, behind her shadows dissolving into nothing. I don't know if my father's apology was real. I don't know if Judith will ever understand what she lost. I don't know if there will be a day when I pick up the phone and dial their number and try again. But I know this Lila will never sit at a table and hear herself ranked last. She will never fish a handmade card out of a trash can. She will never stand alone in a hallway waiting for someone who isn't coming. That cycle ends with me, quietly, gently, the way all real healing begins. Not everyone who raises you knows how to love you. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't leaving, it's deciding that the next generation will never carry the same weight you did. Healing doesn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes it means building a door you never had and choosing for the first time who gets to walk through it. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your experience. Drop a comment below, and if you know someone who needs to hear that they're not invisible, send them this story. Subscribe if you'd like to stay for more. No pressure. I'm just glad you were here.